Hello, friends, and welcome back to C Club's podcast, where we have the pleasure of speaking with folks building at the leading edge of the social crypto space. Today, I am joined by my dear friend, Cooper Turley, who, for many of you, I'm sure needs no introduction. Cooper is a co-founder at FWB, is a venture partner at Variant Fund, and has his fingers in or around many of the leading DAO and social token projects that you've probably all heard of. This conversation is super interesting. We talk about his initial inspiration for jumping into the social token space and contrast that to where things are today. You know, a lot has happened in the past year. We talk about the DAO landscape and have a look out over the next 2 or 3 years and see how that might shape up. And we also talk about the underbelly of token compensation and how Web3 communities and projects might want to develop and structure compensation in their DAOs. There's no shortage of interesting insights, tidbits, and info here in this chat with Cooper, so let's jump into it. Cooper, GM.
GM, my friend.
Really stoked to have you on this podcast. I think we actually did like a first C Club podcast recording. Like, actually should try to dig that up because that was probably months ago, and finally getting around to doing this in earnest. Very excited to have you back on. Can you maybe give us a brief intro? What's the rundown? You're doing 3 billion things, the man who has all the jobs and is in every single DAO. How do you simplify it when people ask, who are you and what do you do?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. I'm a big fan of the show. All the guests you've had so far have been incredible. So if people haven't had the chance yet, I would highly recommend to check those out. I spend my time working with internet communities to create shared assets to invest in communities. So what that looks like is an operator and investor across the creator economy. I co-founded a DAO called Friends with Benefits, do a lot of work with the Variant Fund, then do advisory for wonderful projects such as C Club. I'm very thankful to be working with a bunch of incredibly talented people. When you think about all that I'm working on, I really just look at the humans across the board, and it makes it very easy to do what I do.
Yeah, I think you've been a very active advancer of this sort of Web3 community narrative, the DAO narrative. How are you defining, let's call it your DAO thesis?
I'd say more broadly, investing in culture, creating pockets and assets that represent cultural communities and giving people the ability to participate in their upside. I think that ranges from NFTs to social tokens to DAOs. But when you take a step back, I think it's focusing on the human layer of crypto. When you start to create tokens that represent ownership in those communities, it's very easy to see a future where I can go and work for the brands that I know and love and get paid in the process.
So I think if we cast our mind back, a year ago, the title you had at the time was Social Token Manager. If we can think back so far, what was your original thesis? What was the inspiration for jumping into, these are really nascent communities. FWB, I think you had joined when I was still looking at it going what even is this? There's this jam token, if you remember this jam token that was floating around. Karma DAO was a thing. Roll was a big thing. What was that initial insight? And I'm interested specifically in how you might contrast that with where things are today.
Yeah. So at that point in time, I was very deep down the DeFi rabbit hole. This was very early rumblings of social token land. My friend Alex Mazmej had done a social token. My friend Brian had a social token. My friend Marguerite wanted to do a social token. And so as I looked across the board, I took this experience I had working with teams in the DeFi landscape. So projects like Aave and Balancer, for example. And I wanted to say, how do I apply these same primitives around community management, around liquidity strategies, around governance, and help apply those to more personal communities? At that point in time, it was very obvious to me that there would be a creator stock market at some point in time. I think that was very undefined, but I recognized that I had a cool skill set of being able to help add some color and some legitimacy to these very early stage projects. And so what I would do is I would sit with these creators and have very meaningful conversations around growth strategies. I like to compare it to kind of like talent management in a way. In college, I was doing artist management for a while. And so in a lot of ways, it felt very similar to that, except now instead of releasing music on Spotify, we had a token in a Discord server. And that, kind of ethos allowed me to build in a really new and exciting space. And I think to your point about what's changed, because originally I was working with creators on a one-on-one basis. So this was Alex and the Alex token. This was Brian and his Jam token. This was Marguerite and the Coin token. And what we saw work instead was that these creators became more successful the more that they decentralized to their communities. So things like FWB really showed me that it's less about this one figurehead creator who's kind of leading the whole thing, and more about turning this into a community-wide, community-contributed ethos. And the more that people were able to help step away from the reliance on one person into this wider community bucket, I think the more successful these communities have become.
Yeah, and I think that's a similar insight that we've had as we've begun diving into social tokens. And I think the C Club, I guess we define it as working for or building and investing in Web3 communities right now, which I think just captures that insight there. there seems to be this natural conversation evolution that sort of steps into Web3 that comes from the creator economy. So I think many people I have conversations with are saying, well, this creator economy is a thing and Web3 is the natural evolution of it. Do you see it in that way? Or is sort of like, are we talking about a whole new type of, should there be a new economy defined around this, or is it just the evolution of the creator economy?
I think there's a stack to it. I think that creators have found a lot of success in Web 2 with things like monetizing off YouTube, brand deals, and sponsorships. I think there is a world in which all of that comes on chain, but the reality is that's very unlikely. Right now I see someone's Web 3 imprint being a very different and distinct opportunity from the presence that they've been building in Web 2. And so while there is a high likelihood of those followers being able to convert over as this technology matures, right now when I work with creators on their Web 3 strategy, I challenge them to do small, interesting experiments that are completely new to their audience. This is not trying to take their YouTube revenue and put this in a treasury. It's more so about how do I do access to private content that lives entirely on chain. And I think the more that we realize that success will be found, the deeper crypto native you go, I think we start to worry less about how do we connect the pieces of the old world and more about how do we build a new one.
Yeah, I look at, so, we had Lee on the show, I guess last episode, and, she defines sort of the passion economy or creator economy as helping people generate income online, and the Web3 economy is sort of generating wealth and ownership kind of being the core of that. Increasingly, I see there's a very different business that somebody's engaging in if they are building a personal brand, whether they're a musician or an artist, putting that out through, say, Web2, and building a community that's sort of investable. And, maybe I'd look at the difference between, artist XYZ and something like Squiggle DAO or Fingerprints DAO. And the almost the size and scale and potential that and I guess maybe reduction in trust or risk that exists within these Web3 communities is so significant compared to working with an individual. So this idea of there being like a creator stock market versus there being almost like communities being the evolution of the startup. Do you see, is that sort of how you see the world, or are those going to come together at some point?
That's absolutely how I see the world. And I'd kind of double down. I think that Lee's words around sort of the evolution of creator economy, passion economy is fantastic. If you haven't had the chance to check it out yet, she defines this so clearly that it really helps to just articulate this transition from, Web 2 rented land to now Web 3 where we own the land. And so to kind of like put that another way, investing in communities is like the single most interesting thing to me. The reason why crypto is so exciting is because anyone can spin up an asset out of thin air, but it's really up to that community to make it valuable. I think having these opportunities to create tokens that represent ownership in these groups allows them to do so much more. Something like a Fingerprints DAO, I don't think would be humanly possible, without the advent of crypto. So first of all, they're buying NFTs. You need crypto for that. Second of all, they're pulling together all this capital to go and buy these crazy, crazy assets that no one would be able to buy alone. And this notion of sort of multiplayer investing, I think is so akin to what kids and younger generations are going to want to be doing, that I think when you start to clarify what this creator economy looks like, I really think it's about building, investing, and growing with your friends. And that as an asset class, I think is an extremely, extremely valuable thing to pay attention to.
I just love this framing of multiplayer mode. And when I think about the market and what's working out there in the space right now, it's less about this idea of holding tokens or even just investing. It's more about going along on an adventure. And I think Web3 communities are about people buying into this adventure. And part of that adventure is having the opportunity to see some hopefully asymmetrical upside in that effort. But at the very least, they're building connections and the sense-making organism and access. And there's so much that goes into it. And I think it's probably the most clearly defining thing I see when a new project comes through our door, where they're saying, here's the adventure we're going on and let's go. Here are the baby steps we're taking towards that, versus one that's like, hey, we're going to create the stock market for creators, or we're going to, hold these tokens and get access to my merch or to something else. So very much more a transactional thing. And I'm super curious to see, I think creators, so folks that have built this following on the internet so far, that are able to transition that into a multiplayer adventure, are going to be like, that may be like something in there is probably the best way to articulate in my mind, like the opportunity that we're playing with here.
Yeah, and I think more specifically too, I tweeted yesterday, if you are good at video games, chances are you're probably good at crypto. I think there's a lot of merit in viewing all of these crypto projects as part of like a wider adventure game. I think about your main project that you're contributing to as sort of your main quest. This is very clearly defined. Typically, there's a roadmap. There's a leadership team that's really guiding you through that process. But there are a million side quests that you can go down the rabbit hole with. The reason why I've found so much enjoyment and self-fulfillment out of this like wider DAO contribution landscape is because you can literally go and spend your time on anything you want. Side quests are popping up on the map every day. There's new expansion packs being added every day. The Grand Exchange is quickly becoming more and more populated. The markets are moving rapidly. And so when you get tapped into this market, you realize that it's not about, really trying to like make as much money as possible. I think when we all play video games, we love to earn gold and sort of boost up our inventory and whatnot, but we're playing the game for the experience. When I take a step back and I look at what I've really learned from this activity and involvement in the DAO landscape, it's the people that are around me. It's the fact that I can meet someone like you on the internet and see you for the first time in IRL and give you the biggest hug ever because I feel like I've known you for 5 years. I think that's only going to get more and more intimate as these communities start to grow. And so a lot of what I try and do is help people realize your success will be directly tied to the humans that are in your community. Do not worry about token price. Do not worry about trying to make your community money. If you focus on the strength of one-to-one relationships, and those are extremely valuable and extremely meritful to someone, your community is going to see an exponential amount of success as a result.
I'm such a fan of tall person IRL hugs. They just hit different. Okay, so let's transition. I mean, you published a Twitter thread recently that was like, I think that was boldly stated, "I'm going full-time DAOs." I want to dive into this idea of like, what's it like to work for a DAO? What was the shift that sort of led you to make that Twitter post?
Well, first of all, I would like to say I saw that you also posted that you're full-time DAOs. So congratulations that we are now coworkers in this.
That was
world.
A shit post. That was definitely a shit post against you or towards you.
Yeah. So, I mean, anyone that has known me knows that I've been doing this for the past couple of months. This is not a new thing that I've been working on, but I think putting that flag in the sand and being like, hey, there is merit in me working only across DAOs and working only for ownership, I think is a really powerful signal. I think for a lot of people, when they think of contributing to DAOs, they think about how do I get tokens? How do I get paid to work out of DAO? What does this look like? And I wanted to give people the confidence that while it is very unknown, it is possible. And hopefully through that post, what I wanted to articulate is that you can be entirely self-taught and have a lot of success in this industry. Throughout that post, I talk about my journey going into grant giving DAOs. I talk about how I didn't have a lot of ETH at the time, so I was doing writing to earn my way into these communities. And I think my intent with that was to say, this is a new world. No one knows what the fuck we're doing, but I'm going to take a full leap of faith and say this is where the industry is headed. And I'm also going to show you that there is a path forward that irregardless of your prior experience in crypto, if you put in the time and effort, you can also find a lot of success in this industry as well.
Yeah, I mean, one of my favorite things is being able to have fun with you on Twitter. But I do think that you're right that like it is a meaningful thing to say, and you, I mean, you gave up on a lot of other opportunities to specifically be able to focus over here. So there's definitely like a before and after. And I think the thing that gets me the most excited about DAOs and this time we're in, and I think so many people are sleeping on this, is the fact that today you can be non-technical and you can earn your first crypto without having to invest or build or launch your own token. And I think that's transformative. And if we think of like user experience as being a big challenge, and that UX is really driven around like how do I actually get in or get on chain in the first place, DAOs are going to be this like massive accelerant of the number of people that are coming in. I tweeted recently like the next 100 million users into crypto are more likely to come from Kanye than from Compound. And I think a big part of this is this ability to earn. So I joke sort of at the beginning and joke with you often that you do so many different things and you're in so many different DAOs. How are you thinking about sort of like the work opportunity that exists for an individual and maybe a new individual who's stepping into this landscape?
It's a great question. I think that it varies relative to what your skill set is, but I think finding one core niche ability that you can really add value to any community to is extremely important. So for me, that's now changed into sort of organizational structure, community building, and leadership. So being able to step into a community and say, hey, you should be thinking about X, Y, and Z buckets. You need to be able to have processes in place to support that. I'm very thankful to now be able to step into any internet community and kind of look across the board and be like, hey, there's something lacking here. You want to pay attention to this, or hey, you could use a tool over here that could really help with this. And so I'd say for me individually, patching gaps and really just being able to influence the things that are working well is kind of my core value add. But for anyone else that's coming to the table, there is a DAO that is going to be representative of any skill set or liking that you have. If it doesn't exist today, give it a year or two, and there's going to be somewhere that you can contribute. That's if you're passionate about video games, if you're passionate about sports, if you're passionate about horseback riding, whatever it might be. I think there's a very high likelihood that that will become a DAO that you can join at some point in the future. And so as you think about the way that you contribute there, really honing in on what your mission and your purpose is, I think is extremely important. I like to call back this term teal organizations because I think it's such a fascinating term. And I think it embodies the work for a DAO so well. To give it TLDR, teal organizations basically say that people will self-define and self-compensate themselves for the work that they do across different organizations. And so as you think about the way that you contribute to a DAO, I don't think it's about going and looking at a job board and saying, hey, I want to get paid $10,000 for the next 3 months to do X, Y, and Z tasks. I think it's really about stepping into that community and building relationships with people who are adding value. And as you start to have those conversations, the doors open themselves up. But if you can come to the table and say, hey, I'm proficient in 1, 2, or 3 things and give people a direction on where you can contribute, chances are it'll probably work out. And I think the one thing I really want to call out is that you just banging on a door, just like, I'm here, I'm ready to contribute. It's really difficult. I mean, Jess, you can attest to this. Like, I think it's fantastic how many people are eager and excited to get involved. But the reality is, if you want to earn from being involved in a DAO, you need to go above and beyond to show that you're not just someone that's just looking for a free handout. You need to be in the trenches. You need to be in the Discord. You need to be on the community calls. You need to be meeting people that are in the town hall. Doing things that show that you are very serious about this community. And the more time and effort that you put in, the easier it is for someone like Justin and I to look across the board and just be like, this guy's been crushing it. Let's give him a token grant. Let's really get him ramped up because he's doing all of this work for free right now. And I think that recognition that you do need to put in the sweat equity to start having these earning opportunities is really, really important.
Yeah, this is a topic that's near and dear to my heart because it probably my greatest frustration is as somebody on the other side of the table of people banging on the door is trying to find that matching opportunity. Like and it is tough to identify who you can trust out of the mix. I'm seeing a lot of people speculate with their time in the same way that they would speculate on tokens with ETH previously. And so this idea of like, I want to be involved, I'm really excited, let's go. Great. And without a doubt, I'm pro lurker, pro community. Like I think there is going to be a space for anybody at any level in these organizations. It's truly like the collective there that makes the power. And at the same time, we need to drive objectives. We need to get things done. We need to ship. And I'm seeing a huge gap in that place. So if somebody's knocking on my door and saying, hey, I want to do something, that's great. But the asymmetrical reward is going to go to somebody that says, hey, I want to do something. I've identified this and I've done it. And pushing something over the line or even in sort of the collaboration on helping to define what that might be. So, I had a conversation recently about some educational work that we want to do within C Club. And, I said consulting on that and helping us to define that high level, not super interesting to me. If you want to come to us with a proposal on how you can get it over the line and we can compensate for you, 100% interesting to me. And so for people who are wanting to get in, it's not knocking on the door, it's showing up with a service or a package or a thing that you want to get done and then going to get it done. And I think that's the thing I see the most about you, right? Like you do a lot of things, but you are exceptional at pushing things over the line. You're able to define and you're able to deliver. And I don't know how we make it easier. I don't even know if we should make it easier for people to do that. But I think if somebody's listening to this conversation and say, I want to get into a DAO, making it really easy to onboard into a DAO is one thing. It solves one problem, but the high value problems, the things that are really going to drive these things forward are people who are able to come in, identify issues or opportunities and carry something across the line. I don't know how we do that better.
I absolutely love this topic. I think this is the reason why governance has been such a talking point for me for many, many years now. I think when you think about governance in a Web 2 sense, it's like vote with your shares in some company that you're never going to earn anything from. With Web 3, it is literally your opportunity to define your own role in conversation. And so as you spend time in these forums and as you spend time working on these proposals, the amount of value that can be created for yourself is unparalleled. And so I think the way that I see this playing out is for communities that are looking to onboard people, create better systems for governance to happen. Don't be afraid to over-incentivize governance participation. Be really transparent about the way in which someone can make a proposal. In the event that someone starts a proposal, be there to help them along the way. But I think what we need to do better as the DAO landscape in general is recognize that most people don't know how to write a proposal. They've probably never voted on Snapshot before. And so there is a very high learning curve to being able to get started in the first place. But once you sit with someone and you work with them on their first proposal, I've found that once they actually go through the process of putting that on Snapshot, having it passed, they are very, very quick learners. After that, you're going to notice that they're tossing something up once a month. They're taking stuff off of your plate. They're doing budget proposals. They're doing all this thing that has typically fallen on the shoulders of the leadership team. And the more that you can sort of give someone that fishing pole in the sense of being able to craft proposals, I think the higher likelihood it is that they're going to become proficient, and so are other people around them.
Yeah, I love that. I think this idea of like bounties as core ways to get work done in an organization are far less interesting to me than bounties as a way of teaching people or helping people learn how to be good operators within the organization. And I just wrote down a note here. Why do we not run a session called Learn How to Write a Proposal? What a high leverage thing to do. So look out for that coming out of C Club. Join our Discord. It's going to be fun. You sort of touched on it a little bit in your answer there, this idea of incentivization, of potentially over incentivizing people. I've noticed that you've been involved in a number of different governance proposals, and there's a few that it's really interesting because this gets done out in public, right? And so whether you're a VC trying to get into the last round of SushiSwap, or you're writing a proposal for your service firm to come in and be useful to a DeFi protocol, all these things are happening out in public right now, and it creates a interesting dynamic where we're actually not used to discussing what people get paid and what market rates are and what's valuable. And I've noticed a number of times the communities have really pushed back in ways that maybe aren't unfair, but I think lack the larger context around the sort of, value that's being created by high level operators in this space. How are you thinking about when you're talking to teams about early incentivization and, I guess where are we going wrong right now in DAOs trying to get great people to work with us?
I think we are spending millions of dollars on liquidity mining every single month, and we are spending hundreds of dollars on governance incentives. And thinking about the high impact that can be had from a really good governance proposal relative to getting a little bit more liquidity in your protocol, it's unparalleled that we should spending exponentially more on governance. That's just a hard stop for me. But I think the thing that's more interesting here is when people have the intent to come and work for governance and to work for, a community in the form of a governance proposal, typically people want to try and put like market standards around this and say like, hey, this is going to be worth X amount, or hey, this is going to be worth like X salary or something like that. I think that we need to really throw that out the window. Someone that's really willing to go balls to the wall and like put themselves on the line and say like, hey, I want to be roasted for my compensation to get paid working for this community. That is valuable in and of itself. And I think that honestly, to answer your question about how I'm approaching this, I'm being extremely aggressive. I think there are under 50 people in the world right now that are highly competent in being able to write governance proposals for large amounts of money from different DeFi and crypto projects. And so if you are one of those people that's out there taking, being a martyr for all of those to come, overcharge, 4x what you think that you're worth. Expect the fact that you're going to get roasted, but know that if you spend the time to really be meaningful at how you're going to contribute and the value you're going to add, you're going to come to a middle ground where you're going to be very happy with the compensation that you're getting. And you are going to be moving the ball forward because you now have a public forum that reflects you battling for your way to being able to get paid from this protocol to add meaningful value to it.
How are you seeing sort of measurement be done? Because I think that's another core part to what you're talking about here, which is a lot of what we're compensating for in governance proposals or the work that gets done following governance proposals is maybe not immediately measurable, or it's not like directly reflected in price right away in the same way that like, extra liquidity that's added to the pool might sort of, be reflected in that price. Are you adding in KPIs, OKRs, goals, and have you seen teams sort of hold folks like yourself accountable to the work that's being delivered?
We've had a lot of teams challenge us to put better KPIs in place for the governance work that we do. I think this is extremely healthy. And I think the reality is that governance is qualitative and not quantitative. You can look to things like how many people have voted on your snapshot proposal, how many proposals have been passed, like you said, how much new liquidity is in the pool, or did this project get implemented? And so there are very basic things that you can use as a metric. But I think the broader thing that's hard to quantify here is that community health and community sentiment is not something you can really put a metric behind. Maybe we might be able to start doing like GMs in the Discord, when Cooper started working for you, how many people were saying GM on one day versus at the end, how many people are saying GM and the next day. But more broadly, I think that governance work is a qualitative measure of how is community sentiment evolving as a result of your engagement. Are there more people across the board that feel comfortable in stepping up to the plate to take on key ownership tasks? Are there a higher likelihood of people coming in and taking key ownership roles in these communities? And if you look at the work that I try and do, if I come into your project and I spend a couple months on it, when I end that quote unquote engagement and I step away, I want there to be 3 to 5 people that are basically playing the same role as me and that now have this brand and reputation associated with that community. So in my absence, this is going to keep moving forward and those ideas are going to continue to propagate.
Yeah, I think this is fascinating. A conversation I have a lot with sort of our core team at C Club is this idea of leverage and being high leverage. And I truly think, software is leverage, tokens are leverage. Like we are truly living in an age of leverage where, you're seeing one person, quote unquote, teams launch, multiple $1 million projects and that be the norm. And so I think like that idea the value that comes from individuals who can create significant leverage in these organizations that themselves have the ability to create significant leverage. It's just really fascinating to me. And I think it's the right lens to look at our effort through, where there's process or templates or human capital that's being added into these organizations that really do have an opportunity to grow. And I was sort of thinking about your definition of what you're working on right now is sort of coming in and working with leadership teams and helping to sort of find the things that are missing within communities. I find like 90% of my work is done with early stage teams that are going from 0 to 1. That is what C Club is. And even beyond sort of the formal walls of C Club, I'm seeing a lot of those conversations. I think this idea of the fight for talent is something that I talk about a lot. I truly think 50 people in the world that can have high leverage proposals, maybe even an overstatement. Maybe it's correct. I don't know. But the idea of getting great people into your community who are going to be able to do work to move your core objectives forward, I think is something that we are going to have to get used to paying more for. It is truly the scarce resource that exists in our space right now. That won't be the case forever. But there's also this opportunity for communities who are launching right now to really build a meaningful presence. Actually, and this is a topic I'm kind of curious about. Like, I'm always amazed at how much just going first and sort of making and building an initial community, how much of a moat has been built around that right now. So if you think of like FWB as an example, right? Phenomenal project, right? I'm not getting pitched a million FWB, but for XYZ communities. People just want to go into FWB and go do something within FWB. We're not seeing a million C clubs out there trying to do the same things. C club is doing the thing. Same with the Forefront, same with Bankless. I don't know if this is going to last, but it seems like there's just so much leverage just to making a big impact, bringing great people around sort of a common mission. And if that mission exists and it's sort of open enough, will there be competition against that? I guess this is a long-winded way of me sort of transitioning into this conversation of like, what does the DAO landscape look like as we move out 2 or 3 years? Are we competing? Are these things just massive early start, head start DAOs that are just going to continue to accrue value in people? What are your thoughts?
I think there's a couple things here. I think first and foremost, it shows that giving ownership to your community members earlier than later is a really, really important thing. I struggle with the fact that there's a lot of projects out there that have done multiple rounds of venture funding. They know that they should do a token, but they're really hesitant to open that kimono up. I think what you're seeing now is that the projects that are winning the most are those who are opening up access as early on in the life cycle as possible. I think that's extremely, extremely scary for a lot of founders. But if you look over a 3 to 5 year time horizon, I think that this notion of raising it into an equity vehicle that later converts to a token is going to be completely thrown out the window. The tokens are the valuable asset. I know we're not allowed to say that for whatever reason, and the legal stuff will catch up, whatever. But tokens are where value should be accruing to. And if you are someone that's working on a crypto native project, you need to have a token that represents ownership in that project. And so as you think about what this looks like across the board, I think the reason that people are getting so invested in these communities is because they now have the ability to earn something so early on that is unlike anything we've seen before. And I think to your point about hiring talent, if you are someone who's running a community or a DAO, you need to realize that everyone out there that has meaningful skills is being courted by 5 to 10 other projects. They could just snap their finger on a whim and go out and work wherever they wanted. And so if someone is willing to take the time and say, I want to point a lot of my time and energy to your thing, over incentivize the hell out of them. This is not the time to be nickel and diming who you're onboarding. DAOs are very, very fluid. You're not locking into a 5 to 10 year agreement where you need to give someone a 401k. You are giving them capital on a month by month basis to come and contribute to your community. I think the more that you can recognize that there is no need for you to be really wary and be really conservative about your capital early on, and the more that you can be dishing out that treasury to help incentivize people, I think the better off you're going to be.
Yeah, I see one place that people get hung up quite a bit is around the sort of early distribution. And you think about so many, I think the visibility most people have into most DAOs is like that hello world post where there's sort of like, and the token distribution, here's how much is going to the team, here's how much is going to the airdrop, etc. And I think what you're saying here is really like, almost that doesn't matter so much. I think it maybe matters from a messaging standpoint, an intention standpoint, but there's a lot of optionality built into the creation of DAOs that maybe a lot of people don't fully grasp. How are you when we're talking through token distributions, et cetera, and you're trying to unlock some momentum from teams, how are you working through that sort of challenge?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I would say more broadly, I think of 2 buckets. When you're contributing to a DAO, you can either get compensated in USD equivalent or you can get compensated in ownership stakes. I think that those are 2 opposing levers. So the more that you try and quote in a USD value, so let's call it USDC, ETH, etc., the less you're going to be able to earn on the token side. The more that you're willing to take high upside in the project and work for tokens, the less you're going to take on the USD side. But I think that ownership stake is going to reflect that. And so what I noticed with most of these communities is early on, you are throwing a dart at the board. Giving someone early ownership stakes is really just a hit or miss type thing. You're really guessing, do I really trust this person? What is their credibility in this space? How much do I think that they're going to be able to add value here? And you're going to take a leap of faith that person is going to own into it. What I noticed with most crypto projects is that there comes a time when you start shifting from percentage ownership to USD equivalent of those tokens. And so early on, if I'm working for a project, I will typically an allocation in point blank percent ownership in this community, right? But then after a certain point, let's say after there's been a treasury diversification or 2, there's been a clear secondary market established and someone new is coming to the fold, you're no longer saying I'm giving them point blank percentage points. You're saying I'm giving you X dollar equivalent of tokens. And I think that transition from one to the latter is what shows maturity in these communities. And your goal as someone that's out there looking to work for one of these DAOs should really be trying to get ahead in that former discussion, because that form of discussion is the single greatest wealth creation event of your entire life.
It's funny how it's an awkward transition to be made, especially as, people who are, so, I get to host an FWB chat every Thursday afternoon. And for the longest time, I get paid in a number of FWB tokens, which for months and months and months were really not worth a whole lot, hundreds of dollars. And then all of a sudden they were worth thousands of dollars. And, as somebody sitting there, I'm like, I prefer and I love the idea of just being able to earn stake, not selling any of those tokens. This is me being able to be aligned with the core idea behind owning and earning into these communities, which is that through my efforts, I can increase the value, and that value will be represented in the tokens that I'm being rewarded on a monthly basis. My preference is always to be paid in those tokens. And also the idea that I get paid, thousands and thousands of dollars for doing something that takes a very small amount of my time is like, yeah, probably not super fair. And so it was interesting for me to sort of feel a difference as the FWB team came with me to make that transition and say, hey, we want to transition over to USD equivalent. And even just to sort of for me to wrap my head around like how I felt about that, because my preference today would just be to continue to earn those tokens, and I'm still taking that USD equivalent in those tokens. Have you found any hiccups in making that transition, or is there any advice you can give to projects that are sort of pushing up against that?
Honestly, I haven't gone through it enough times to really have like very convicted ideas here. I think more broadly, the more people that you are onboarding, the more serious you need to be about how you're compensating those individuals. If it's early on and you're hiring, let's call it 2 to 3 people, I think it's okay to be dealing in percentages. I think when that starts to cross a 10-person threshold, you need to be conscious that everyone else is going to be aware of how much everyone else is getting paid. When that starts to be the question, I think that things get really, really dicey. And so this is kind of the area of DAOs that people don't really talk about, which is like the underbelly of compensation, the underbelly of ownership. As the community starts to scale, who has the largest ownership stakes, who's getting compensated what? These are really challenging conversations. And the reality is, I actually don't think these conversations should happen in public. I think this is why leadership teams exist in DAOs, is to be able to know highly confidential information about how the group is getting structured, but allowing the community to trust that everyone else knows what's going on right there. And so you see across some communities like Yearn, salaries are being very clearly defined. The amount of token compensation is being very clearly defined. But I think this is more of a sentiment check along the way. I think if you were to go into a community and every single time saying that we're hiring someone for X dollars and Y amount of tokens and having a yes or no vote on that, it just slows the process down. And so I think as you start to really think about what the org structure looks like here, most of these DAOs have an operational team. Let's call it 3 to 5 people who are very early on in the project. They were able to get the community to where it is today. And then so they should have key decision-making powers that allow them to move fast and nimble on pretty big decisions. I think what's important here is as you're making those key transitions, making sure that the right people know what's going on and they have purview into what's happening is important to make sure that everyone is incentivized here. And so to directly answer your question about how you get there from like transitioning from ownership stake to USD equivalent, I think you just got to take a leap of faith at some point in time. Typically, I like to say this is after a formal fundraise has been done, because this kind of proves value of that token and it shows that it's no longer like you just like saying something's worth something because someone else does. Like having that institutional backing, I think really solidifies at this price. There were large reputable people that were able to come and back us. So we're going to peg that as kind of the amount that we're tying these token grants to. And I would say for anyone that's going through a similar process, when you have that fundraising conversation, use that as your high leverage time to lock in the people that you know and love, because past that conversation, things are going to start to get really dicey. And I think your goal as a community operator should be to have everyone in your corner locked down by the time you do that proposal so that you can move forward with speed.
Yeah, I think there's a couple interesting threads to pull on there. This sort of idea of public versus private being one of them, but just to close the loop on the former piece around compensation, I think so much of, I guess, the advice that I'm giving early teams is to really lean in and communicate your intention to create optionality. So even like this idea of seasons, or the idea of quarterly sort of structured salaries. And I guess underneath that is like this idea of overly communicating the fact that we don't really know what this is going to look like long term, and that things are going to change, and that at some point we're going to have to review salaries, and at some point we're going to have to move to a US dollar equivalent, or at some point, maybe we've been undercompensating in certain ways and we need to reallocate funds to sort of focus our new on our new strategies. And I don't know how that plays out long term. My guess is there will be churn in communities as you do that. But I think to me, like the point of governance and the point of leadership in these organizations is really, or I guess it's really built on legitimacy. And that legitimacy comes from, in part, being early and delivering and proving you can get stuff done. And I think it also becomes a part of like what the underlying point of the governance process is. And so I think, with Yearn and these guys doing it out in public, yeah, it's about building that legitimacy in a community that sort of started in a very unique way. I think when you look at FWB or others, there's a lot more of that legitimacy placed in the core team, and for a number of reasons, I think that works really well. Do you see there being a sort of a transition at some point? Because I think a lot about, right, is this idea of when do you truly want the crowd and when is a small squad the right way to move forward? So like this overall structure of an organization often sort of leaned into, we say, well, why a DAO? Well, the wisdom of the crowds, the world, life is getting more complicated out in the world. This sort of sense-making hive mind is sort of like the way that we're going to keep up with this fast change. And yet I think you see most communities have, as you said, 3 to 5 people that are at the core. They're showing up every day. There's just information asymmetry built in that. And to me, it's like to deliver the work we want to deliver at C Club, a lot of it's private, a lot of it's early, a lot of it needs to be done by sort of smaller groups or relationships. And also I see this huge opportunity to bring these networks of talented people to bear on the projects we're working with, on the initiatives that we care about. How are you thinking about, like, if you're going to say, like, is there an ideal structure or timing of like when you lean into the crowd, or are you suggesting for everybody just to say like squad up? It's actually squads on squads. That's really the way forward. As I see a lot of differing opinions on what DAOs really are, I guess.
My take here would be that small working groups are going to move the needle and move the ball forward. The community is meant to be a vibe check on those conversations. So it doesn't make sense to rely on the community to put input into every single proposal that's going through. Everything that's meaningful that will happen will have a key owner and have a key driver of that conversation. And it's up to them to really make sure that that proposal is getting seen and heard by the people that need to see it. I think that this looks like opening a document up for comments. I think this is having a town hall conversation about things. I think this is leaning on other people that are competent in the community for feedback. I do not think that this is get sign off from each and every token holder to do something. There is very much a finesse where you need to be able and willing to move the ball forward once you feel like you have enough buy-in to actually start having those meaningful conversations. And I think what I've noticed that people struggle with in the proposal state is they will spend too long pontificating on the smallest details of a proposal, when in reality, the overarching theme and sort of task at hand is far more important than the individual details. You are basically going to a community to get sign off that something is a good idea. You're not going to a community to get sign off that each and every single small bullet point is a good idea. That is something that needs to be trusted by that community, that they will figure it out over time. The reality is all of these things are so variable and modular that I think a lot of the times it's actually more important to say, hey, we don't know exactly how this is going to be implemented. We have a vague, loose idea of what this is going to look like, and we're going to put as much color around this as possible. But all of this is subject to change. And I think a community's job is to say, we back this general direction and we trust this person writing this proposal to go ahead and execute that. And as the proposal owner, if you can go out and really show that you're the one to get the job done, I think that that's how you get the ball moving forward in a DAO while still having buy-in from everyone else involved.
Yeah, I love that. There's this conversation about reputation in crypto that I think is really interesting. And often, it comes from folks looking to sort of evolve the credentialing system or to, better do airdrops. I'm thinking what Brian and Rabbit Hole are working on over there. But as you sort of talked through that last answer there, this idea of sort of reputation within communities and within the broader community just sort of came to me as like the core thing that individuals who are acting in these organizations are really building towards. Like it's the ability to say, I want to go do something, carry something across the finish line, and do that with the consent and support of the community just seems to be like the highest leverage way of being able to create, reputation it's almost like, sure, the ETH or the tokens that you're earning along the way are great, but the platform that you're building through being a successful operator there is like so much more valuable than I think anybody could even fully recognize at this stage. And I think you're an example of that. There's a lot of other people that are just bubbling up right now in the space that are doing that. They're just proving time and time again through small little things that build to bigger things that I think are going to unlock a lot of value for them in the future. Well, sort of a side question to this, like how are you thinking about reputation? Like, are you somebody who's, building reputation on a specific wallet because you think there's going to be mostly on-chain rep and your NFTs are going to be the thing that unlocks a lot of value for you? Or are you still sort of leaning into more of the soft skill reputation based on, the Dunbar's number and the homies that you roll with?
Definitely more on the on-chain side of things. I think about when you try and imagine a future where reputation is really credible in an industry, it's very difficult to rely on off-chain data to actually do, very meaningful reputation work. I think that on-chain work is going to have to be that resume for you. And I really love this world where your wallet is your username. In the same way that we have an Instagram profile that we're posting from, I see every on-chain action that you take is the same as posting on Twitter or posting on Instagram. I think when you start to cross those two things over, following a wallet is an incredibly exciting idea. And I think what's going to happen is over time, the concept of signing a message will start to take the form of off-chain actions that we see today. So things like posting in a governance forum, writing on a Discord forum, commenting on a proposal. Right now, there's two separate worlds where on-chain actions are very separate from human actions. But I think over time, we're going to start to see plugins and solutions where that credibility and that reputation is baked into an on-chain wallet. And so to answer your question, yeah, I built up a ton of credibility on my on-chain address. I mean, Cooper.eth, go check it out. It's where I do all my shit from that I want people to see. But the best thing about crypto is you don't have to have all of your shit happen on one wallet. It is very easy to have side wallets and side portfolios for you to go adventure around in the wider landscape and then make sure that you're playing those games early on. But what I'm really excited about is if you look back at my wallet history and you go back 3 years ago, you can see me depositing to Aave for $20 and learning how these protocols work. You can go back and see me voting on compound proposals, number 1 and 2. And so this long history of a ledger, I think, is extremely valuable, but it also makes you think twice about what you're doing. More recently, I've started to recognize that my actions I'm taking on that address today will come back and be seen 10 years in the future. And that sort of recognition that these are permanent actions that you're taking really makes you think twice about the actions that you're taking on chain. And I think that from a reputation lens just focuses you to be so much more articulate in the on-chain actions you're taking, intentional about the decision that you're making, and intentional about the tokens that you're buying. And I think when you start to really view your on-chain address as your global username, you start to be a lot more intentioned about the way that you spend your time in the wider Ethereum landscape.
I'm just having flashbacks to the memories posts that happened on Facebook from back in the early days when it was just such a different way that people were interacting on that platform than they do today. And I'm guessing something similar is going to happen with these on-chain actions. I'm not sure if I'm fully on board with you on the whole on-chain. I mean, without a doubt, on-chain reputation is going to be important. I think what's interesting, though, is that for a number of reasons, you're going to want to spread that reputation out or those actions out over multiple addresses. And so necessarily, you're going to be very schizophrenic in your personality, if you will. I'm pretty sure Cooper has a shit posting address somewhere that nobody knows about where he's going to do different stuff. So,
Nope.
Okay. Well,
nice
he
try,
probably
IRS.
doesn't have that, but yeah. But even without an intention of being sort of a dodge in any way, I think it's very reasonable to want to, for OPSEC reasons, have different accounts and stuff like that. And so, I'm sure we can tie those things together. And, there's definitely the internet sleuths out there that can tie these interactions together. But I believe in my heart of hearts that sort of the value of human connection and personal connection is a thing that will never really truly be represented in software or on chain. And I think we see it quite often right now in this idea of the vibe check. So is the vibe check ever going to be on chain? Probably not. Maybe you'll get a derivative or some sort of indicator of that. So I think people will very much manage towards their profiles on chain. And also, there's just that we are social humans that evolved from small working groups called, tribes, I guess, back in the day. And we evolve very slowly. And I think we just want to work with people who we trust and we vibe with, even though that might be some anonymous CryptoPunk on the internet.
Can I add a comment there?
Please, yeah.
I would like to comment and say that I have one address I do everything on. I have only one address for everything, all my actions, et cetera, et cetera. No, I have different addresses for the different ways that I spend time on the internet. I have one address that's my public governance participation address. I have one address for my NFTs, one address for my foundation NFTs. I have a mirror address that I'm doing stuff on there. I have one that's more of a speculation address. I have an address for all the different multi-sigs that I sign on. And I think being able to separate this out is extremely important. The more successful you are in the industry, the higher risk factor you put yourself at. And so as you start to make an imprint for yourself, recognize that it's okay to be able to have different addresses. And what I challenge teams to do is a very simple thing that I think Audius has done really well. Connect multiple addresses. Collabland right now, you're synced to one address. I have tokens in a bunch of different wallets. I have hot wallets, I have cold wallets, I have some that are more secure than others. My on-chain identity is not one single address. It's the accumulation of all of my different addresses. And so recognizing that people are playing on different profiles in the same way you would a video game where you have different characters for different build outs, this is the way in which this is going to work. But I think the thing that ties it all together is the sovereignty of saying, I can prove that I own this address. And that action of allowing you to prove it is what's actually valuable. It's not the on-chain data itself. It's the actual ownership of those on-chain actions.
I love that. And that just takes me back to thinking about how different the world is today, given the way SushiSwap raised their last sort of treasury diversification round, where I was on that call with all these VCs pitching the team on how good of an actor they are, the value they've created in the space. And the natural sort of follow on to every single one of those conversations should have been prove it. you need to prove it. And so now these organizations need, like, as maybe as an individual and as an organization, you need to start building reputation that you can prove that you're a good actor within the space. And I think that's significantly different. It's a different world today than it was in your off-chain landscape, where you really don't have that sort of ability to verify, even in a trust minimized way, across multiple stakeholders in a DAO or organization. I think that's fascinating. I want to transition a little bit. You are a masterful Twitter user, and I will thank you for, I don't know, some percentage of my Twitter followers have come from you retweeting, and so thank you very much for this. You're also just overwhelmingly positive. You are, ETH to 10K, DAO life is the only life, blessed life, GMs. There's obviously a strategy behind that. And I don't want to infer that you are different than that in person, because you're very much not. You're an optimistic, like the way that you come off on the internet is not this massive difference from who you are. But there is, I think, there's subtle undertones to all of this stuff, which is like that there are things that are not right. There are things that are going wrong. There are big issues that we need to address. And so, like, if I was to say, okay, well, Cooper, it's upside down land today. The way you win Twitter is to be brutally honest about the challenges and limitations that are facing the space that we're so passionate about. What are those tweets? What are those big issues that you think we need to be paying attention to?
Yeah, I've tried to call them out a lot more. And first of all, thank you for the awareness on Twitter. It's something that I put a lot of time and energy into it. I'm very proud of the following I've built there. More specifically, I'd say that I'm not building a following, I'm building a community. And I think the more that you start to quantify that engagement, I care far more about how engaged people are with my content, more so than how many people are seeing it. And so you do a fantastic job of this as well. It doesn't go unnoticed. And I think that's the reason why we're having this conversation today. When it comes to getting down to those hard topics, I think being able to build conviction that you're highly credible in an industry and then taking the stab of saying we need to fix things is a lot better than just shouting from the rooftops when people don't even know if you've been involved in the first place. When I saw this big wave from Ethereum to BSC and people were saying, oh, Ethereum gas fees suck, I can never trade on this. Most of the time, those are people who are barely taking any on-chain actions. But if there's someone like me that's coming in and saying, hey guys, gas fees are a real issue. My nonce count on my main wallet's at 5,000 and this is not okay. I think that's comfortable to be able to say and actually have credible discussion around that. And so if I'm criticizing something, for example, recently I tweeted the MetaMask and Ledger bridge is infuriating. It sucks right now, and I think that for a lot of people, they can feel lost in those conversations. There's not public forums to talk about these things. It's so deep and meta down the rabbit hole that people feel very alone in those regards. So I think my job is to first and foremost build credibility in the space, show you that I'm someone that's educated in the things that are happening and experienced in the things that I'm talking about, but then incite conversation in a really productive manner. I'm not just bitching and saying like, give me a free flight, like I missed my flight on Delta or something like that. Like I'm saying, this is a real problem. If you are working on this, please tell me how we can solve this. And by putting it out into the public, I think it really makes teams feel that really honestly. And what I've found, if I am tweeting about something that's like broken, a lot of the time the team will reach out to me, give a few pieces of feedback, try and like understand where I'm coming from. And through that conversation, I can like very clearly tell them the problems that I'm having. And I think that's the way that these things get brought front and center. It's not by having a million people spam support tickets, because that's just not the way that things get done.
Okay, so what are those things? Like, what are the things that you think are the biggest barriers right now to that optimistic outlook or outcome that we're driving towards?
Onboarding, first and foremost. So it should take you less than 2 minutes to set up a wallet and get ETH in that wallet. Right now, it takes 20 minutes and 2 weeks of understanding to know what you're doing. I think custody is really, really important. So people understanding what's going on with the cold hardware wallet and basically the reason why they need that. More knowledge around like self-sovereignty and what it means to actually own your own seed phrase, like knowing to literally never give that to anyone ever. Like I could say that a million times, but I don't think it's until someone gets rugged that they really understand what that means. And so I think just broadly across the board, recognizing that there is a spectrum. There is a basic mode and there is an advanced mode. Crypto does not win by starting in advanced mode. It wins by starting from a basic mode and letting people graduate to advanced mode. Right now, when you think about all the most interesting and exciting things in crypto, it's an advanced mode. We're slowly starting to see things that trend more towards that basic side of the spectrum. But the sad reality is that most people will not care about custody. Most people will not care about private key management. They just want to tap in and get involved in the ecosystem. And so I think that we as an industry need to focus a lot less on making everyone play advanced mode and focus a lot more on recognizing that most people won't play advanced mode. And our job is to help get them there over time. But that's not somewhere that they're going to start on day one.
So, I mean, embedded in that sort of answer is this idea that there is a lack of attention being put on user experience in crypto. And that really hasn't been my experience. I think there's a lot of people who are, I mean, you saying that is like UX is a problem is like absolutely no shock to anybody. So I'm curious as to like, do you see the world in the same way? Like, do you feel like we're not, as an industry, that we're not putting enough time and effort into it? Or is this like actually a limitation of the tech that, like, this idea of sort of watering down Web3 to make it easy for people to play and ultimately removing like the core reasons, true ownership of these networks? Are you just suggesting that we're not doing enough there, or are we sort of, or are you just trying to rally attention around the fact that, this just needs more and more attention than we're giving it right now?
There's a lot of very talented people dedicating their life to this problem. So for me to try and say we're not putting enough time and effort into this is really unfair. There are a lot of people that are putting a lot of hard work into this, and I really respect each and every one of those people. I think there can always be more time and attention, but I think the reality is these things take time. Crypto as an industry has been around for maybe 10 years at this point. Ethereum has been around for maybe 6 of those years. And so thinking about the time scale that we're operating on, these things just need time to breathe. I think that we are in the MySpace era right now of crypto, where there are products that people are using. They're very janky. People can pick them up, but it kind of requires you to jump through a few hoops. I believe that the next bull market in 3 to 5 years is when we see true mainstream adoption, because we will have the time to build the technological infrastructure that supports these platforms at scale.
Yeah, I think the thing that gives me the most excitement around sort of overcoming the user experience challenges is like the role that DAOs and these communities are playing in that onboarding. And somebody referred to DAOs as being like the customer service for onboarding people into crypto. The fact that you can go to FWB or Forefront or C Club and open up a chat with a community of people who are going, yeah, I'm here to help you. Like there's no dumb questions. I think FWB does a great job of this. Protein, one of the projects that we're working with at C Club, Jump, they've all put like a lot of effort into that user experience problem, which is, let's more specifically, I think, an onboarding problem, and in helping people get up the steep learning curve faster so they feel comfortable to be able to go and do the things that you and I did years ago, which is like poke around, have transactions fail, lose money, do all the things that, and I guess luckily for us, it was a lot less impactful back then. It was cheaper. There's smaller dollar amounts that are being thrown around. I think, again, goes back to my point before. Not only are people earning their first crypto through coming in through DAOs, but they're also doing it in a way that they're supported by other folks who can help them get up the learning curve faster. And it's crazy to me. But, today, if I look around, I guess, look at the houses around me here, the number of people that have a MetaMask here, like I could probably drive a couple kilometers and not see anybody I live kind of a rural area, but the likelihood that somebody who drops into a Discord does not have a friend who's also deep down that rabbit hole is very, very high. And that's something that I have a hard time wrapping my head around because I live in this world on a regular basis. And so I do think that like calling this stuff out with sort of the intention of reminding those of us that are way down the rabbit hole that, we need to bring others with us, I think is super valuable.
Yeah. And a lot in there, I think that we win by showing and not telling. I don't think the way we get people to download MetaMask is by doing educational videos on how to set up a wallet. I think it's by showing them cool projects they can come and spend time in and make meaningful relationships. And so when people start to think about adoption, I think it's very easy to look to celebrities and influencers as the key entry points for these communities. But I think it's actually the inverse. I think that it's very small niche pockets where it's one-on-one relationships, it's word of mouth, you're telling your friends and family. And I think our goal as operators in this space, and the reason that I do the work that I do, is to create as many of those opportunities as possible. If you can set up 100 little internet communities for 50 people to all come on board, those webs are going to spread out way more and be far more impactful than one influencer dropping in and getting 10,000 people to join their Discord.
Here, double click, underline, highlight. I mean, it's so easy. It's funny. I remember having conversations with some folks earlier on about C Club and them saying, well, why aren't you working with bigger artists? Why aren't you going after the big creators? And it just, I think, is a fundamentally flawed approach to take somebody who has already made it and just who wants to just sort of shill a coin or make a little bit of extra money because that's just the business they're in. They've been able to turn their influence into capital very easily. They have lots of ways of doing it versus these sort of embers of communities that can just start to get hotter and hotter together, that when you add more fuel to that fire, they just start to grow into raging bonfires. And I think we're still in this like early stage. We have some bonfires that are bubbling up. They're casting off sparks. New communities are growing and building from it. And yeah, I think that strategy of really focusing on these squads, not influence. I mean, geez, it made me cringe so hard to think that the Kardashians promoted a Ethereum extra token. Like, not only is that just like not helpful in any ways, it's massively counterproductive to the world that we're trying to build. And so, I don't know, you get me on a high horse thinking about like the idea of where we want to spend our time and attention. And I truly believe that building meaningful Web3 experiences where people come and go, oh shit, there's a secret. We're on an adventure. LFG, GM, WAGME. That's where it's at.
Yeah, let's stick on that for 1 second. I want to call out that I've been very lucky to be spending time with a lot of like high profile influencers here in LA. And the biggest thing that I've learned is it's not about getting them to drop their own NFT project tomorrow. It's about getting them deeply ingrained in this community. So if you're someone that's listening to this that does have a following and does have a community, really think about the way that you can play these games together with your followers so that you can really expose your human aspects to them and show that you're willing to go through these pains with them too. I think that the most obvious answer is to say, hey, I'm an influencer. I want to drop an NFT collection so people can buy my work. But the reality is the ones that are doing the most and the best work right now are spending times in the communities that exist today. Someone like Gary Vee, I think, is actually a great example of this, where he came into the space, people were skeptical of his work, they weren't really sure of his intentions. But as he started participating in these programs, he was buying NFTs, he was learning with people, he was talking about drops, he was going into Discord. He was able to build legitimacy for himself so that when he did do this VFriends drop, people were able to enter into that and actually feel confident that he knew what he was talking about. I think the biggest reason why we saw this major downturn in things like Nifty Gateway is you had all these people who had never made a MetaMask transaction selling hundreds of thousands of dollars of NFTs. I think that your success in crypto is directly correlated to your credibility in the space. And if you're someone that wants to be successful here, spend, let's call it 1 to 3 months getting highly educated in the spaces that matter. And once you've played a few games, once you've gotten rugged a few times, once you've kind of earned your battle stripes, that's when I think you then start thinking about these experiments rather than using a crypto experiment as your very first foray into the space.
Cooper, I think that's a phenomenal thought to end on here today. Obviously, the work that you're doing with those folks, I think will pay off big in the long term. We're also, very eager to have those conversations within the C Club world. I think that's the thing that I'm so excited about as I look at the DAOs and communities that are leading in this space. It's just how much they are playing multiplayer together and building, new opportunities and new interest and expanding the pie. It's a small group of people that are interacting in these places, and there are billions upon billions who will be here eventually. And if that doesn't get you excited, I don't know what does. Appreciate you taking the time. There are so many other things I want to get into. Obviously, we'll do a V2 at some point in the future. I'll give you the last minute here. If there's anything you want to plug or point people to, how can people find you on the internet? What are you working on?
Absolutely. I want to quickly quote my friend Nick Emmons. I think is a great quote. He who wants the pie less gets more of it. I think that there's a very positive sum mindset here in crypto right now. If you're someone that's willing to understand that you don't need to fight for every small cent that you're earning and you're willing to give your value back to the community, that will come back to you in parallel. So if you're listening to this podcast today, please go and join a DAO. Like we said before, don't knock on the door. Actually have something very meaningful that you're bringing to that community. Understand there's going to be a ramp up period of a couple months to get started, and treat this as a 5 to 10 year time horizon. I think it's the best decision you could ever make. To answer your question about where you can stay up with me, Twitter at Cooper Chupa. It's where I'm spending most of my time tweeting out magic to the world. And then more specifically, the work I do on a day-to-day, Discord, Cooper Chupa number 9799. Shoot me a DM and I'd be happy to have a conversation.
Yeah, appreciate it, bro. We'll talk to you soon.
Talk soon, man. Peace. Peace. Peace.